of Reginald Denny.
The defendants in the Reginald Denny beating case found not guilty of some of the more serious charges against them. The jury isn't through. Good evening, everyone. I'm Pete Wilson.
And I'm Pam Moore, in for Suzanne Shaw. Thank you for being with us. The jury will return tomorrow to try to come to a decision on two final counts in the case: an attempted murder charge against Damian Williams and an assault with a deadly weapon charge against Henry Watson. Linda Joyce reports.
Damian Williams and Henry Watson came to court with their heads shaved today to hear their fate. And when the verdicts were read, Williams and his attorney Edie Fall embraced, as Williams was found not guilty of the most serious charge, aggravated mayhem in connection with the beating of Reginald Denny. In all, Williams was convicted of 4 simple assaults and a simple mayhem, far lesser counts than the prosecutors had sought. Henry Watson was convicted of only 1 charge, a simple assault count in connection with the beating of Reginald Denny. Outside the courthouse, about 30 protesters listened while the verdicts were being read and had these reactions.
I don't think either one of them should have ever been put on trial for what happened in Los Angeles, in the streets of Los Angeles that night following the Rodney King verdict.
There's been some measure of justice. There has been some resemblance of the criminal justice system acting favorably on behalf of people of color.
If it wasn't racially motivated, then what was it? I don't know. I just think that it was a miscarriage of justice.
This trial, named for trucker Reginald Denny, savagely beaten when the riots began in April of '92, will be remembered for the searing images of that moment, with this videotape, which one prosecutor declared is now burned into our brains. The jury watched the video again and again during the trial and by themselves while deliberating.
I think that we have to start learning the lesson that videotapes do not prove trials, that in fact it's a much more complex matter than that. The juries have to find intent. They have to step back and say, do I think it's the same person? Even if I do, why were they doing what they were doing? And it's the human components that a videotape do not necessarily show.
Again, 2 counts still to be considered on Tuesday, but as it stands, if Williams were to receive the maximum penalty, he could serve up to 9 years in prison. Watson, convicted on 1 count, could do 6 months in jail. In Los Angeles, Linda Joyce, News Center 4. Well, the victim of the beating, Reginald Denny, says he's not surprised by the verdict. In fact, he thinks that defendant Henry Watson should go free because he's already spent 18 months in jail.
It was the videotape, just as it was in the Rodney King case. Williams and Watson charged with the most notorious attack of the LA riots, if not one of the most notorious ever. The videotape made it so. The images burned in our memories, the intersection of Florence and Normandy Avenues, passers-by set upon by a mob, Reginald Denny dragged from his truck and beaten. And the Denny beating trial became a symbol of that riot.
You see a driver of that red truck in the street, and there you see the man driving that truck being robbed.
Reginald Denny's not just robbed, but beaten nearly to death. That was April 1992. A month later, 3 men were arrested in an early morning raid.
Los Angeles Police Department very, very concerned at our inability to reach Mr. Denny at that time he was being assaulted and after, and to assist him. And so we're hopeful that at least this will atone for some of that.
Among the suspects, Damian Williams, now 20.
Come on, smile, you're on candid camera.
He's charged with throwing a brick at Denny's head.
How much time do you think you're going to get?
I don't know, but I don't want to see you when I come home.
Henry Watson, now 29, allegedly the man putting his foot on Denny's head. They were charged with attacking Denny and 7 others. All along, community activists argued white defendants in similar cases get more lenient treatment. They worried about the possibility of life in prison.
Hopefully, we will not have a replay of that explosion that was so painful and so traumatic for our city.
That explosion came after the Rodney King police beating trial. Home video was central to that case, and news video was key to the prosecution in the Denny case. The helicopter reporter who took pictures of Denny's beating was among 47 witnesses called to testify. He identified Williams and Watson as the attackers. The defense claimed mistaken identity and tried to convince the jury that even enhanced photos of a tattoo on an attacker's arm don't pin the case to Williams.
Could you tell with reasonable certainty if what you are looking at now, what you're seeing through the lens, is the same as the tattoo of Mr. Williams that you saw a few minutes ago?
No, I can't.
During the 6-week-long trial, the defendants never took the stand, but Reginald Denny did. He's watched video of the beating, but still remembers nothing.
Do you remember your face being held to the ground by someone's foot?
No.
Do you remember being hit over the head by a large white object?
No.
Denny surprised the court when he walked over to the defendants' mothers and embraced them. He has forgiven the attackers, whoever they are.
Because they got to know it's got to stop somewhere. And if someone doesn't have the courage to cut it out, where does it end?
A third defendant, Antoine Miller, has yet to be tried, and now his lawyer is calling on the DA to drop the charges against him.
Well, Los Angeles police were on heightened alert pending this outcome, but there were no special precautions, we're told, by police in our area. As for local reaction to the verdicts, though, News Center 4's Vic Lee found a lot of surprised people here, surprise on both sides of the spectrum.
Joe Cammett lives in Bakersfield. He drives his truck between Los Angeles and San Francisco, hauling furniture and food. C. Cornell lives in San Francisco's Western Addition. He makes cars look like new at Poor Boys Auto Cleaners.
It's getting to the point where anybody can just go out and do anything they want, and they just, there's no sense in...
Joe Cammett identifies with Reginald Denny. Both are truckers, both are white.
Something that happens before you, and you can see what happens, and people are charged for it. Something's wrong, you know. I don't believe it's right.
It could have happened to me. It could have happened to anybody from the ghetto, period.
C. Cornell identifies with the two men accused of beating Denny. He agrees with the verdicts so far.
It makes me feel good because, like I said, they let the police off easy. So therefore, you know, they really couldn't pinpoint it on them. They was going on videos and so what forth.
Reaction to the verdicts was as polarized as reaction to the Denny beating itself. For some, the Denny case became a symbol of the random violence in our society. For others, the case took on racial overtones, that the defendants were being treated more harshly because they were black.
Those who disagreed seemed to agree on one thing, that our legal system is not working.
I think our legal system definitely has problems. For the amount of money that we spend on it, we don't get our money's worth, that's for sure.
It's a sad state the United States is in if we have to compromise like this as opposed to prosecute criminals, you know, regardless of what side of the badge you're on.
Many who disagreed agree that it's now time to leave the King riots behind. Vic Lee, News Center 4.
The Denny trial is just the latest in which videotape was a centerpiece of the proceedings. Without that tape, there may have been no case at all. But as News Center 4's Belva Davis reports, what seems clear on the tape isn't always so clear in the courtroom.
The cases seem clear-cut. Videotape recordings of 3 people being beaten as cameras rolled. But juries who've had to weigh these images in determining guilt or innocence have found them anything but clear-cut. In only one case, the assault on William Kiley in San Jose, did the prosecutor win conviction as charged.
The point is, it wasn't the videotape, it was the interpretation of the videotape.
So in spite of the outcome of the case against Damian Williams and Henry Watson in the beating of Reginald Denny, UC Berkeley professor Jerome Solnick believes videotape as evidence is valuable.
The alternative to a videotape is eyewitness testimony, which is far more questionable than videotaped evidence.
In the most famous of these cases, the public was so convinced by the videotape of the guilt of 4 Los Angeles police officers in the beating of Rodney King that a billion-dollar riot followed a jury acquittal of the officers.
The King case, there was no doubt as to who was beating King. The defense had a defense that said this was not Williams and Watson. You saw somebody beating them. We didn't know exactly who they were.
Because of the tape, Solnick said,
many people will feel that justice wasn't served in this case.
But that's the price paid for a jury system.
The jury is fundamentally not a rational system. It's a popular system. Popular justice is never perfectly rational.
Law enforcement officials are increasing their use of videotape, so the debate over its value is sure to increase. In San Francisco, Belva Davis, News Center 4.
Another analyst commenting on the Denny verdicts today said jurors must weigh the intent as well as the actions of the defendants. And videotape does not always show intent. It just shows action.
Right. Of course, it's not over yet, as we said earlier. 2 more counts. The jury goes back to work tomorrow to finish up on that.
In fact, the most serious of those against Damian Williams still to be decided.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, moving on now to some of what's been happening in the Bay Area. The